Welcome back to A Fresh Story, the podcast where we have conversations about brave decisions to start over again. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Jenny, and we're so glad you're here today.
Hello, sister.
Hello there. How are you?
I'm okay. I am wearing a sweater that you gave me today that it's actually super soft. It was one of yours, so it feels
so
very
soft. I think I kind of bought it so that I could be Corey from Empire Records.
Everybody wants to be Corey from Empire Records.
I have a skirt that goes with it, but it just never really worked. It's not the most comfortable outfit, the crop sweater and the mini skirt. So
anyway, so actually we've been talking a little bit about grief. The 20th anniversary of our grandfather's passing is coming up. And we've been kind of, as we do now that we are living under the same roof, we do this fun thing where about 10 o'clock at night, we're like, okay, we're going to bed. And then we delve into like a deep conversation for like 3 hours.
Yeah. So, the good news for me is that usually Olivia is standing in my doorway and I'm in bed.
Yeah.
So it's comfortable for me. She gets a couple steps in.
I do get some steps in, but we've been talking a lot about grief. And so when Zoe Fishman, the author, I connected with her on Twitter and I did a little digging, and her new book that just came out, The Fun Widows Book Tour. She's a novelist, and Zoe is a widow, kind of this unexpected death of her young husband. And we had such a fantastic conversation with her. She's today's guest, obviously, a mom of 2 boys and a beautiful writer.
Yeah, I can't speak for Zoe, but Livy and I both cried during the recording of this podcast. It was a beautiful conversation. This newest book, I believe, is sort of a fictionalized dedication to the people that supported her during that really awful time. And she talked in the episode about all the ways that people supported her. And I think it's so important. I think so often people don't know what to do or say, and just showing up in your organic way, and sometimes having a little help as far as what to say is good too.
Yeah, and I started doing that on Twitter a while back as kind of helping people with little scripts, and then I kind of came to Jenny with this idea of what if we make this into something bigger. And so we're working on something bigger to help you learn how to support your people.
Big. It's about 5 by 8.
So it was a really fantastic and beautiful conversation about grief and hope and love and heartbreak. So please enjoy the conversation with Zoe Fishman, and remember to rate, review, and subscribe to A Fresh Story so that we can keep telling fresh start stories. Zoe Fishman is the 2020 Georgia Author of the Year in the Literary Fiction category. She is the critically acclaimed author of 6 novels, the most recent of which is The Fun Widows Book Tour, which will be published in March of this year. She is the recipient of a myriad of awards, including an AJC 10 Southern Books We Loved in 2019 selection and an Indie Next Pick. Interviews and profiles of her have been featured on Publishers Weekly, the Atlanta Jewish Times, the Huffington Post, among many others, and her essays have been published in the New York Times Modern Love column as part of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Personal Journey series and Modern Loss. Zoe worked in the New York publishing industry for 13 years before moving to Atlanta in August of 2011. She was most recently the executive director of the Decatur Writers Studio, as well as instructor, and a visiting writer at SCAD or SCAD Atlanta. She is currently working on her next novel and raising her 2 young boys in Georgia. Zoe, we're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I actually came across Zoe on Twitter, and I'm kind of, I dabble, I'm not a novelist yet, but I'd like to dabble in novelist Twitter over there. And so you're a very accomplished writer, and I've been following you for a while, and you are so vulnerable and open with sharing your story. And so when I came across you, I thought, we got to talk to her on the podcast. So we're really happy you're here today.
Me too.
How are you today, Zoe?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. My book was just launched last Tuesday.
Yay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's doing really well. And it feels really good because this book is undoubtedly the most personal thing I've ever written.
Yeah.
And to be applauded for authenticity is pretty cool.
Yeah, which is actually, it's a perfect segue. Why don't you take us back to the beginning of your Fresh Starts journey?
So in 2017, I had been married for 8 years. I was a full-time author, and I'd given birth to my second son almost 2 years prior. It was June of 2017. Um, I was blissfully happy. My husband and I were very much in love. The kids were tiny. I had a 5-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. Um, so the physicality of that kind of parenting took up most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband worked full time. He was a psychologist and the healthiest guy on the planet, literally.
Mm.
And he got to work one morning and never came home. He had suffered an AVM brain aneurysm and was taken by an ambulance to the hospital where he spent a week in a coma and then he died. It was absolutely crushing. I had never in my naive life expected anything like that to happen. It's never been part of the narrative that I had constructed for myself. And so I had to reinvent myself as a widow, a single mother on a single income, and also someone who is a griever first and foremost, because grief isn't something that has any kind of timeline on it. Once you're grieving forever. So I was not only grieving him, but I was grieving the life I thought I was going to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big, something you said that it was not in the narrative that you constructed, right, for your
Yeah.
life. As a writer, so first of all, take us back, right? We want to hear the full picture here. Where did you meet your husband? Kind of what was your story, your love story?
It was a beautiful story. I didn't truly meet him until I was 30. So I moved to New York right after college. I was 21 and spent, 9 years dating the free world, but never even really having a boyfriend. And for 4 years, I would see him on the F train in Brooklyn in the morning. We got on at the same stop. And I had met him at a party through a mutual friend of ours, but I could never get up the nerve to say hello to him. I just thought he was so handsome and out of my reach, and I didn't want to embarrass myself. I didn't want to lose my seat in that particular car. Last train on the last car on the F train, it was perfectly positioned to get me to my job in the city. And he became my subway crush to all my friends. Everybody knew about him. Urged me, get over my fear and say hello, but I just couldn't do it. And then one fateful May morning, on the weekend, we got on the train at the same time, and he got on the train with my former work friend, who was still my friend, and her husband, and she did the introducing. And it turned out that he had been intimidated by me in the same, and it had been 4 years of just kind of longing to say hello, but neither of us having the gumption to do so.
That is
Wow.
the most New York love story. And I love that.
It is really, I couldn't believe that had happened to me.
Yeah.
I'd been on all the dating apps. I'd gone on all the bad dates. I'd pretty much given up on anything happening organically.
Yeah. That's really a timing is everything situation too, right? Because chances are if you had connected 2 years earlier, it wouldn't have been the right time.
That's exactly right. And he felt the same way. I was in a place, my career was just taking off, and I finally understood my worth.
Yeah.
And so I met him at exactly the right time.
I love that. And so what was your wedding like?
It was really beautiful. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama.
Okay.
And so we got married in Orange Beach, and it was one of those days that started off cloudy, but the wedding was supposed to be outside, and I begged and begged and begged my mother to stick to the plan, and she did. And thank goodness she did, because it turned out to be, the sun broke through the clouds and it was just the most gorgeous afternoon. And everybody, it was a small wedding. And so everyone there, we loved and loved us. And it was just filled with joy.
I love that. And you get to carry that with you, right?
Yeah,
Like, which is the beautiful part about memories. The beautiful memories, right, is that we
Yeah.
get to carry that with us.
I
And
remember on the aisle and crying because I couldn't believe that I was that lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's a scary thing to feel that lucky.
that's exactly right. And
Yeah.
I don't come from optimistic people.
Us either.
Yeah, that's not part of my DNA. So I really had to urge myself to lean into the possibility that yes, this was luck and timing and a lot of bad dates,
yeah,
pride, a lot of self-knowledge. And he was just the most wonderful man. He was truly a kind, curious, enthusiastic man who pursued life, 100%, pursued joy as well.
yeah, we love that. So maybe I'm wrong, but I'm gonna assume, did you come from a Jewish family?
I did.
Okay, because well, a couple of things tipped me off because we do too. But also you were in the Atlanta Jewish thing. So what I feel like, we very much understand what you're saying, because when you come from often I would say the Jewish family motto is like, what's gonna go wrong, right?
Yeah.
And
Why
so
would it go right is
right,
really
why would it go right, right?
Yeah.
So that definitely. What was it like growing up in Alabama as a Jewish family?
It was, so my father was a political science professor. He's originally from Queens, and my mother from upstate New York. So that's how we ended up in Mobile, Alabama. He taught at the University of South Alabama. We were aliens, but I only have mostly wonderful memories of being an alien. I found the people that I needed to find. I enjoyed the beach, which was 45 minutes away. I knew I was different. I think the biggest struggle for me is that I desperately did not want to be different. And so I spent my time there, from age 4 to 17, trying to be blonde haired and Baptist. And it just wasn't going to work out.
Yeah. So how did your writing start? Where did that kind of intertwine with all of this?
So my father was, because he taught, he had the kind of schedule where he could be home with us in the summer for most of the day. And I write about this in the book. He ran a summer school for me and my brother, much against our will. Part of that was writing book reports and writing. And I remember right away feeling so confident with the page. Even if the writing wasn't very good, I just felt at home there. And so that's how I first began writing. My mother was also a voracious reader. And so I became a voracious reader. And eventually I had a high school teacher, an English teacher, Mrs. Strawn, who's no longer with us, rest in peace. But she encouraged me to submit a short story to a citywide writing contest. And it won. And it was, it really made a huge difference in my pursuit of writing career.
You mentioned feeling like an alien. And I wonder how your writing made you sort of unalienized you. And then also how finding your husband, how that felt in the scheme of things, of feeling like an alien in the world, because I often also feel like an alien in the world. And I know how important it is when you express yourself or you find your people.
Right. The first part of your question was how did it inform my writing? It was it informed it completely. I kept a journal since I was in the 3rd grade. I had a Ramona Quimby journal. Um, and that was where I poured all of those insecurities and alien type feelings because I didn't have the confidence to be an alien on the outside.
Yeah.
Already looked so different. I didn't want to appear to think so differently. So it became a haven for me. And then when I met my husband, it was one of those very rare and beautiful moments in life where all of the steps you've taken prior make sense. You know, he had been my subway crush for so long, and I had spent a great deal of time imagining the kind of person he was and manifesting the life we would lead together. And then when it happened, it was so beautiful and also so terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you marry your husband, you start having kids, and take us to that day. So he goes to work, and what you lived this nightmare,
Yeah.
and the thing about nightmares that we often don't remember is that a lot of people live nightmares, but it's so isolating, right?
Mhm.
And so what we found with doing this podcast is like there's so much trauma and there's so many people that live these like horrible moments, but it feels like you are completely in it and you're the only person, right, that's lived this nightmare.
Right.
So what happens? Who ultimately called you to let you know something was going on?
Oh, it's really a sad story. You know, he was the kind of guy that was in touch all day long. And on that day, for some reason, I didn't hear from him. It was 2 days before our youngest son's birthday, his 2nd birthday. So my parents were in town, and we were all supposed to meet at his mother's house, which is about a 45-minute drive away for Shabbat dinner. And I thought it was strange that I hadn't heard from him, but I'm also not hysterical. I'm not a hysterical person, or what I wasn't then. So I wasn't that concerned. But then we sat down for dinner and he didn't show up. And an hour, all of a sudden it's 6 o'clock and everybody's eating and we can't get in touch with him. And my mother-in-law knew something terrible had happened. She just felt anxiously as his mother. And we get a phone call from the hospital telling us you need to get down to the emergency room right away, but they can't tell you anything on the phone. So I just remember that. I mean, we were so lucky that my parents were there to watch the kids. My mother-in-law and I got in the car, drove to the hospital, and still I thought maybe it's just a minor heart attack, or didn't occur to me that was going to be life-threatening. And so we get to the ER. The woman that receives us, so he had a Samsung phone, so it wasn't a number passcode. It was through fingers. It was a certain kind of movement, and nobody could get in. And I knew it, but I had forgot. The trauma, I forgot it.
Yeah.
Wasn't able to contact anybody, and I forget how she ultimately got my mother-in-law's number. But she's walking us through the corridors of this hospital, and I'm just holding hands with my mother-in-law, and they take us into one of those tiny rooms you see on television, the rooms that never deliver good news. And these 2 nurses came in and told us that he had suffered an aneurysm, and that on a level of 1 to 5, it was a 5. Brain was filled with blood, and they couldn't tell us anything else. So then we went in to sit with him, and I remember those days, but I was so shocked. I couldn't feel anything because I was completely beside myself.
Yeah, and I'm sure your body goes into hyper protection mode,
Yeah.
right? Like
all I could think about was our sons.
Yeah. So, what did you do in those days? Like when you're sitting there with him, did you just like sit and wait, or was there music or reading?
There was, he was Israeli, so he came from a very musical, spiritual family.
Mm.
We would all kind of take turns sitting vigil. He grew up in Atlanta, so there were so many people that came to the hospital, brought food, but I hid. I didn't
Yeah.
see anybody. I didn't want to hug anybody. I just wanted to, I sat there all day, but then it was imperative for me to get home every night and say goodnight to my sons.
Yeah.
And so it was like an hour and 20 minutes away from our house. So that's what I did every night. And I saw them in the morning and I told them what was going on because I wanted them to know the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. I think a lot of people think I also have two sons, and I haven't gone through something like that, but I think that we've gone through our own particular brand of trauma. And I think that it's so important to tell kids what's going on, because
Oh,
otherwise they internalize things.
oh
Mm-hmm.
my goodness. I can't think of anything worse than hiding your emotions from them because you're communicating to them that emotions aren't valid.
So he passes away, and then what's that like to wake up into literally a whole new world?
A nightmare.
It is a nightmare. It felt like watching a movie about someone else.
Yeah.
Nothing, I'm the kind of person that I'm pretty pragmatic. So I just immediately got busy unraveling all the red tape of his life. And
Yeah.
that's an extraordinary amount of time and
Yeah.
effort. It's also a savior to me because if I was doing that, I couldn't sit with the pain.
Yeah.
And so I just, there's so many different elements involved in unraveling a life logistically. So that's what I did. And that our oldest son was just starting kindergarten. He died in June. So really by September, he started in August. I had done most of that heavy lifting.
Yeah, and you had to form a completely new identity within just seconds.
Seconds. Yeah. And I didn't, but I wasn't one of those widows that wears the ring 3 years later or
Mm.
keeps those hanging. I wanted to, all the stuff I wanted to get rid of. And I don't know if that was just because it was too painful to look at, but
Mm-hmm.
I quickly set about rearranging the home and put up
Mm.
hundreds of photos of him for the kids. We spoke about him every day. But in terms of his things lying around, they were not.
You have to decide what works for you and your kids. Like there's just no choice.
Yeah.
And it's so individualistic. What was that like, packing up his things and sort of what was that experience like for you?
I just felt I was numb.
Yeah.
So called his, best guy friends and his brother and said, please come take a look if there's anything you want. First, I took my favorite items of clothing of his and packed them away for our sons.
Yeah.
And then I had them come by and pick what they wanted, and then the rest I took to Goodwill. It was very quick.
Yeah.
And I think for some reason, and I'm so grateful for this, maybe because I'm a writer, I had kept all of our cards to each other. And in a box. And so finally, when I was done with, Social Security, bills, college loans, you name it, selling the car, I sat down with that box of letters and just sobbed because they're such a beautiful representation of not only who he was, but who we were together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I really appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty in telling this story, because I think with grief especially, there's so many people that love to prescribe what grief
Mm-hmm.
looks like and what it should be and right, which we'll get into because you definitely have a lot to say about it. But I think, what I love about what you're saying is like, for you, that's what worked best, is not having those items around and having that moment to look back on your life. And there's so much judgment with grief. And I
Yeah.
think like that's why it's so important for people like you to write and tell your story, and gives other people permission, right, to say,
Mm.
well, I'm going to grieve the way that I'm going to grieve. So I just love that. So how did your writing come into play during all of this time, if at all?
So I had just been signed. No, I had just submitted my idea for my fifth novel, Invisible as Air, to my agent and editor. It was a new contract. And while he was in the hospital, that deal was getting done.
Oh,
Yeah, it was very strange, but also such a relief that I would actually be getting paid.
yeah.
My husband had been the primary money provider for us, and I was with the kids and writing. So the book was always supposed to be about grief, Invisible as Air. The story was already in place, which is the story of a mother who suffers a stillbirth and then masks her grief with OxyContin. I wanted to write about how that drug knows no boundaries, no class, no
Yeah.
socioeconomic level, no race, no gender, and how it destroys lives, largely because it's prescribed by a doctor in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was what I was going to write about. But when I started writing, I knew grief on a whole other level. I knew it firsthand. And so I think ultimately it became, I hope, more authentic to the reader. And it was also my escape. I mean, I wrote that book considering how many other things I had going on, because it was the only time, A, my children weren't with me, and B, I wasn't in the depths of despair. And again, it was my savior. I mean, that book really, really provided me with a life raft.
I would imagine that perhaps when you would sit down to write this book, a writer wasn't the identity that changed.
No, the only thing that stayed constant. You're right.
And then also stillbirth, where did that concept come from? Because that is something that is, again, not talked about and happens very widely.
Someone very close to me suffered that. And then coincidentally, two other people in my orbit suffered.
Yeah.
And I, at that point in my life, I couldn't fathom something more horrible than carrying the baby to term, going to the hospital, delivering a baby who many times is not even alive, and then the female body doesn't know.
Yeah.
Not only in the depths of despair, but your breasts are leaking, your hormones are going crazy.
Right.
People who just saw you pregnant don't know any better, so they ask you how the baby's doing. That just seemed to me absolutely heartbreaking and life affecting. And I thought about the ways that would affect a marriage. Before my second son, I suffered a miscarriage very early on, maybe 9 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it was incredibly disconcerting. And he tried his best to empathize, but he just didn't understand.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, I just went many levels further and imagined how that would affect a marriage, and coming home to a room already set up, and then you have all the babies to get rid of. Just heartbreaking.
It is. And my dear friend, one of my best friends, had a stillbirth, and we just had another friend that also just
didn't get to leave the hospital with her baby.
No, and it's horrific. And again, it's something that happens a lot. And again, people do not realize how much it happens. And it goes back to this concept of like, There's a lyric in a song that's actually about miscarriage. My friend Jane Kramer wrote, and she says something about standing at the checkout line, and you're like almost like an alien, right? You're living in this grief bubble. Everybody else looks normal around you, and you are just not anymore. So, can you talk a little bit about like how grief changed you, kind of as a human on a cellular level?
Oh yeah. I relate to so much what you just said, how the world just keeps going. Nobody feels, you feel so insignificant, and you just want to scream, in the middle of the street, this just happened to
Yeah.
my, he just died. Doesn't anybody care? I know I was very lucky in that I had an incredible village. Um, my parents were here for the first 2 weeks and then ended up moving here to help
Wow.
out. My brother moved here a year
Wow.
later. And because I didn't meet my husband until I was 30, I was blessed with this amazing network of women. And that's why I wrote Fun Widow as an ode to them, because they really stepped in and took care of us. There was a spreadsheet, somebody would visit once a month for a year, leave their families behind and come help us. And my son only knew kindness and generosity and selflessness. I mean, in between watching me cry and feeling the sadness all around, there were these tremendous bursts of joy. And that tempered my disbelief at the fact that everything else around me was still operating as usual, because I had that incredible care. But it's funny, I was just, some good things have happened recently with Fun Widow, and it's the same feeling.
Yeah.
Even they're absolutely, crushed by life, feels like nobody else cares. And also, when you're celebrating a victory, it feels like nobody else cares.
Yeah. So,
Very interesting.
and it goes back to that idea that like it's so hard almost as humans to recognize that we can hold two emotions at one time, right? Something can be deeply, traumatic, but we can also have moments of joy within those times, but it's very hard for the human brain to recognize that. And I think it's so important to model that for the next generation of people. Let's talk about Fun Widows book tour. The book Fun Widows tour. No, it is the Fun Widows book tour. I knew I got the name right. I was like, I knew there was a book in there somewhere. The Fun Widows book tour. Okay, tell us about the book, because I'm psyched to read this.
Oh, thank you. I started writing this book right as the pandemic hit. And as a single parent during the pandemic, it was hard.
Yep.
Were you a single parent during the
Yep. I
pandemic?
was alone with my two boys in the house. So, and I hear you.
Yeah, I fully lost my mind, maybe
Yep.
6. Yes.
I have PTSD, like serious PTSD from that time.
I believe it. It was horrendous. So the book was it was originally called The Book Tour because I didn't think my grief was interesting enough to hold a reader's attention. So I wrote the first draft in my garage, which is, not a she shed. It's like a legit garage. Deep freezer filled with Trader Joe's stuff and bikes and cobwebs and roach carcasses. And my brother and mother would come over twice a week for 2 hours, while my kids were in virtual school to help them. And I would just walk out to the garage and type. I'm a very structured writer, so I always have to have an outline. I had an outline, I was following it. But I knew as I was writing it, it didn't have heart. Wanted to get the first draft in because, as a writer, you're especially a mid-list writer, meaning someone who hasn't broken through the best-selling barrier yet. You're always terrified it's going to be taken away from you.
Yeah.
So I turned in the first draft, and both my editor and agent were like, we like the idea, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
50 pages later. And they very kindly suggested, this isn't really about a book tour. It's about a widow who's trying to put herself back together again, who happens to be an author. And once they gave me permission, and I gave myself permission to really turn this novel into a memoir of sorts, it took off, and it was much easier to rewrite. And I ended up, it was like 4 drafts later. Everyone was happy with what it turned out to be.
That's amazing. And what a nice, not nice, but what a, I'm trying to think of the word, like a special way to honor
Mhm.
your grief, right? And honor by like you are obviously so appreciative of the village around you, and that you got to kind of like include all these people as like a major thank you and say like thank you for getting me through this. And also, again, this is why writing is so important and telling our story, because think of all the young widows and young moms who are now single moms and within a second, right? And people don't
Yeah.
realize life
No,
happens fast, right? And your voice is gonna be, in their hearts and their heads. And it's so monumental and and so brave. It really is. So thank you for doing what you're doing, because like you said, it's so incredibly isolating. And one of the reasons that we do this podcast and that we're so passionate about telling all of these stories is that when you can see that somebody else lived your experience, you know that you're not alone in this world.
Mhm.
And that's all that matters.
that's exactly right.
So if somebody is listening to this and they're going through some sort of a fresh start in life, what would be some general wise words that you could impart to them?
Well, first of all, you can do anything. You might not want to, but you can. Second of all, you'll surprise yourself with your own strength. And ultimately, that will feel really, really good, even though right now you feel really, really bad. There are no rules. People say all the time, self care. It'd be nice if we had the time,
Yeah.
but a mother, a single
Mhm.
doesn't really happen.
No.
But for me, the one thing that I cling to and makes me feel so much better and so much more together, I get my nails done. If you can squeeze in the time for something like that,
Yeah.
and you can find an extra $20 every week, I highly recommend at least 30 minutes of completely tuning out from
Mm.
your responsibilities and the noise all around.
Yeah, I love that. I did notice your beautiful nails, by the way. So I did while you were talking. I love that color. And then our last question: what was the last thing that you ate and truly loved?
So my best friend came in. I had a book launch party last week, and she and my other best friend who lives here, we went to Pont City Market, which is this really cool open air space here in Atlanta.
Mhm.
And we went to a place called Batiwala, which is Indian street food.
Mm.
Had a sweet potato chaat, which was this insane salad of like sweet potatoes, pomegranates, these tiny little cornflakes. It was just orgasmic. It was a touch of,
Sounds really good.
I love that.
and I I definitely never go out for lunch. So that was a
Mhm.
huge treat, and I'm still thinking about it.
I
That
love
sounds
that.
great.
So if anybody wants to read the Fun Widows book tour or any of your novels or get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
I have a website, zofishman.net. You can follow me on Instagram. It's at zshacham, SHACHAM. And I'm on Twitter at zofishman76.
And we'll link everything in the show notes too, so people can easily find. And I'm literally going to go right now and get all of your novels to read because I need something new to read.
It's true.
Well, thank you so much for just opening your heart to the world,
Yeah.
because it's very scary to do that, especially after you've been through what you've been through.
Mhm.
And for being so passionate about sharing your story and helping other people. We're very, very grateful that we connected with you and that we got the chance to talk.
Thank you. This was a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to today's story. We're always here and we're proud of you. Until next time, brave one.
A Fresh Story is brought to you by Fresh Starts Registry, the first and only platform for everything you need to start again. You can read the show notes and learn more about today's episode at freshstartsregistry.com/podcast.